Yo, 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 this is the Streetwise Podcast. We're here to help you level up your game, level up your leadership, and level up your life. I'm your host, Matthew McReynolds. I'm a multi-brand franchisee, and I'm a franchise consultant where I help people find, launch, and build their ideal business. My main goal is to help you get off of zero and become the person that your dreams need you to be. Buckle up, get your popcorn ready. Let's go.
Yo, this is Streetwise. I'm your host, Matthew McReynolds, and today we have David Busker, franchise consultant with FranChoice, franchise expert, and we're going to learn some things. Mr. David, how you doing today?
Good. How you doing?
Oh, I'm great, man. It's a great day to be alive. We were just talking off air. I'm in the middle of launching the new brand and training right now for becoming a franchise consultant, and you're a few years ahead of me.
Yeah, though I was a franchisee first and then became a franchise consultant.
Yeah, so I'm interested in how that whole thing came about, but I want to start a few steps back. How did you become a franchisee? So I'm assuming you had a full career before launching into the business ownership space.
Like many of our candidates, right? I was in corporate America, and I started as a CPA in the 90s with a worldwide CPA firm, Arthur Andersen. Then I moved to a Fortune 500 telecom company called Charter Communications, where I was mergers and acquisition. I was in finance and acquisitions for 5 years, and I was in the wrong seat one day when they brought in a new head of our department. EVP, and hadn't met the guy, but called me into his office. I thought, hey, great, I get to meet the new boss, and there was HR, and he was bringing his team from another company, and I was in the wrong seat that day. So that was kind of strike one on corporate America. So I got a new job. I had just gotten married, like a month before that, and bought a house, goodness. Right? So you know how that goes. So, just married, just bought a house. I'm like, all right, I need to get a new job, but I also had really good experience, and I knew I wanted to go something smaller. So I went smaller to a regional company where I came in as CFO, and control my destiny a little bit better. 3 years later, got promoted to CEO. It was a family-owned real estate development company, and loved the business and loved everything. But fast forward, the owners, the family, didn't have any kids in the business. Put a new legal board in place, and they loved the company, everything we'd done. But the new board coming in was like, well, why are we going to do all that? So they blew up the company and outsourced everything. So that company does not exist anymore. So, and I was CEO right, for 8 years there, and but even as CEO, wasn't my company, and so you don't control your own destiny. So that was in 2015. So I joined. I really knew at that point, I'm like, I've got to do something that I can. My success is really not someone else's choice. And so I had some options. I had some time to kind of think about it. My wife's a corporate executive. And so I joined a startup company that I knew it was high risk, high reward, but the guy really recruited me and kind of made me an offer I couldn't refuse. And so I joined there, and that was in 2015, a few months after I got laid off. And I just, a few months into that, I could see, this is a great idea, but it didn't look like the business model was going to be successful. So I started looking at other things. I'm like, I had success in real estate, commercial real estate, and I was still a partner in some of the projects that I had created in the development world. So, and I still am as of today, right? These days, I'm like, I need more of those, more, passive investment opportunities or side hustles, if you will, or investments that I build and then have someone else run them. And so I started a franchise business. I had a consultant found me at the right time, and I had a friend who was very successful in franchising, had built a string of 18 locations and sold out for a really, a huge number, and is independently wealthy, and
Wow.
that's everybody's goal. But for me, I'm
Right.
like, it kind of changed my mind about franchising. And so I talked to the consultant, became a franchisee, and I signed a franchise agreement in April of 16, while I was still had a corporate full-time job in, it was in a commercial real estate services, project management. So I was doing that. And then I signed the franchise agreement with a fitness franchise. And then, that fall, I could see my boss started closing markets. And I
Uh-oh.
could see, like, I was the best performing market, but I'm like, well, the business model may not be working. And so
It's coming.
so I had talked to the developer who had sold me Cycle Bar, the fitness franchise. He was he was also a franchisee. Like, he bought the brand as well. And so we were in training together that fall, and I had gotten to know him and said, "Hey man, I really like this franchise world. It's entrepreneurial. There's no red tape. It's a meritocracy, it's not easy, but at least I know I'm controlling my destiny." And so I was asking him about, a new day job. Maybe that company needed a CFO. That was my background, something like that. And he said, "Well, you're a CPA, you've been a CFO, a CEO, you own a franchise." He said, "You should be a consultant." And hadn't occurred to me. And I'm like, "Well, what's that entail?" So I started investigating it. He referred me to FranChoice, started talking to them, and then, was kind of thinking about it. And then sure enough, the day we opened my franchise, March 6th of 2017, my boss emailed me and said, "Hey, we're out of money and today's your last day." So
Wow.
I took that as kind of a little bit of the universe telling me that I need to go work for myself. And so now I owned a franchise, which I had an operating partner that was running it, and it wasn't,
Okay.
there was no day job there for me to have. So I got it launched and I started talking more seriously with FranChoice, and then, they, they agreed to give me a contract, and I started in August of 17.
Oh man, thank you so much. That was such a clear and concise journey from, I'm sure there's a whole bunch else that went in there, but that gives me a lot to kind of go back through and break down. The first thing is, you hear about these businesses, these corporations that, they pivot or they bring in, they get bought out and then they just adjust everything. And you think about the lower levels are the ones that are at the most risk. But I mean, here you were the CEO for one of these companies. What does that feel like when you're actually a high end executive? And to preface this, I have never stepped foot into corporate America except for when I used to visit my dad. He worked at Apple Computer for 22 years before he
Okay.
retired and bought into our first franchise at Mosquito Joe. So my corporate America experience is being a
Pretty
kid,
limited.
walking up. Yeah, my dad started working there in '95, and this was either right before or right after Steve Jobs came back. The stock was maybe 20 cents a share, and my mom didn't want him to take the job because it seemed like, "Ooh, we don't know what's going to happen with that company." Turns out it was a good experience, but I don't know this life. I don't know that world, but man, to be a top level executive and to be multiple times have your legs cut out from under you, what does that feel like?
Not very good. I think the reality is it was just unusual, organizational circumstance, right? I mean, it wasn't like
Okay.
I took some action or anything. It was, reorganization of some sort, a corporate reorg, an outsourcing, of course, in essence, a bankruptcy liquidation situation. So
Mhm.
now, when I was CEO, I mean, it is, it is a little, it's personal to you, right? I mean, this was a private company. It wasn't a Fortune 500 company, right? It was a smaller, medium-sized company, but they asked me to build them. They said, we want you to build this management company, and we want to create a legacy, a long-term thing to last past us. And that's what I did. And they seemed to love it and everything. But, circumstances change, and they got to be at an age where they did not want to make the business strategic decisions anymore, because they'd watched their father do that. They were third generation. So they watched their father do that, and they said, we don't want to make the same mistakes he did.
Wow.
So they put this, but they couldn't figure out a succession plan. And, the idea, I think, was that the management team could evolve into, raise outside capital and continue to manage their portfolio and other people's assets over time. But it never really worked out that way. And they, had the new board had no interest in that. So, I mean, so it was very personal to me, that particular thing, right? Because I had built the company, I'd hired everybody there. I was kind of, I developed a lot of their, projects and done a lot of the acquisitions and things. So, yeah, it felt, it's a big blow to your identity and finding out what you're about.
Wow.
And it was about the same time, I lost a parent. My, kids, I have 9 years, I have triplets, and at that, they were 9 years old at that point. So, but the saving grace for me, and a lot of my candidates are not necessarily in that situation, is that, my wife is also she's a corporate executive, and she's been very successful in that world. Although, she, during COVID, she lost her corporate job, through a reorganization. And, so she's come to appreciate that I'm now self-employed. No one can fire me. I completely control my own destiny. And, so it's certainly been a blessing to us. And I think I'm a believer that, all those things happen, and it got me to here. So, not without challenges, but
Sure.
I'm certainly happy where I am.
Yeah, no, that's special, man. I'm a firm believer our past prepares us for our purpose, and seems like you're a living testament to that. Um, Holy cow, 3 kids, triplets. So I have 3 kids,
Oh,
6, 3, and 1,
you're in
and
the
I
throes.
was able. Oh yeah, I'm in there right now. But they're staggered. You know what I mean? I can't imagine just getting them all in bulk at once. What was that like?
Well,
How
you
are you
you
doing
need
that and building out your
another
career?
you'd need
Okay.
another
All right.
podcast for that. But
That's
uh,
fair.
they're now seniors in high school, so we're getting ready to be empty
Wow.
nesters all at once next summer. And college is, we've been looking at
Right
this
there.
college year. So um, it is, it's very different. And but you don't know what it's like having anything else, right? I mean, it's my
Sure.
circumstance. And so 3 great kids. They're all wonderful students. They're all great kids, great humans. So I feel, again, I have no complaints.
Oh, that's awesome, man. Okay, so walk me through when you guys set up the franchise, the fitness franchise. You had an operating partner, and you were more of a silent investor. But then you lose the full time job that's paying the bills, and the business didn't necessarily have a role for you to fall into. Were you collecting any money from it at that point, or was all the profits essentially paying the team and just feeding back into the business?
Yeah, well, of course, it was a brick and mortar franchise, and those can take a while to ramp up. And so, yeah,
Sure.
it was not profitable out of the gate. And so I was, looking for a job, and but I had a very capable, operating partner. And so it was, getting a brick and mortar open, that 90 to 120 days before you open, when the build out's happening and the setup and the training and it's like, that's where felt like I was working two full-time jobs. And then
Sure.
once we opened and we had a schedule down and everything was just rinse and repeat, it became much easier immediately as far as management goes. So it wasn't, it wasn't terrible, as far as if you're talking about like kind of workload and things like that. And then of course, once you do it once, then the second, third, multiple, next time you do it, it's a lot easier. So, but it was, it was definitely an eventful year that year.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, I can imagine, for me, in my experience, it's always the first time doing it. It seems like you're just scaling this huge mountain. And then once you've done it, I mean, you might, next time you try it again, you at least know where to put your feet, you know where the grips are. And so your body kind of develops some sort of a muscle memory
Yeah,
to
that's a good
it.
analogy. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's what I tell my candidates, when we're going through this process. I'm like, look, I'm your Sherpa. I can
there
guide
it
you up the
is.
mountain. I can give you the tools and tell you which path to take so you don't fall off the cliff. But I can't climb it for you. You're going to have to do your due
That's
diligence and
good.
things. But once you've climbed it, yeah, like you said, the next time you go up that mountain, all right, you know the path, it's much easier, where things are. So, you might even do it, without a guide, but you still may
Yeah.
hire a guide to help you, uh,
Yeah.
even though you know
Yeah,
the
no
path.
doubt.
So, yeah.
There's different types of people out there. There's the people that, have no idea and they don't want to be blinded. And so they bring in the help. And then there's that next level of, okay, I've been through this before. I kind of know how to work through it, but I remember how well the experience was because I had you there. So I'm just going to rock with you the whole time, man, because you made this experience way better than it would have been by myself. How has being a franchisee assisted you in adding value to your clients now that you're a consultant?
Uh, Immeasurably in every way, really. I think it does give you just such a tremendous amount of credibility to say, I have been through this process. I've had the same anxieties. I've had the fears and some sleepless nights, but also had all the rewards and things that come with, running your own business. And so it's, I think it's really helped me. Of course, with credibility and those kinds of things, but also just, I think a more realistic, maybe it's certainly a more realistic advice for my candidates, and as far as the process goes, what to expect, understanding it's not for everybody, and not, that it's. I never claim that it's easy to own, start a business and own it. It's not going to be easy. I don't want you to think it's easy. There's nothing automatic. Just because you buy a franchise doesn't mean they're going to do the work for you, or it's magically going to create customers or anything. However, being in corporate America is not easy. And, a big percentage of our candidates come from that environment where they get to that vice president level or director or vice president level, and you start to plateau because there's only very few spots at the top. And so you're in that middle management. And then you start hitting 50 or ish, and if you haven't been reorged or downsized, or, some people are just, they're in transition. They're like, I need to do something and I don't want to go back. So that's a very high priority, high urgency candidate. But also a lot of people see the writing on the wall. They know that if they're not in the C-suite by 50, you're out by 60. So what's your exit strategy from corporate America? What are you going to do? Do you even have a plan? So if you're even curious about it, it pays to talk with a consultant, understand your options. It doesn't mean there's no obligation. It doesn't have to, go anywhere. But I had a candidate, just recently, they, that I was referred to them by a previous candidate of mine. So they worked at the same company, and you know,
Nice.
the first candidate, she was successful. She loved her business and was expanding. And, but originally she had referred me, right to another person there. And I talked to her and she's like, yeah, this is very interesting to us. And then nothing happened. Right. And then 3 years later, this year, this was in 2020. So 3 years, she's like, she called me and said, I just read your newsletter and it just triggered me and we should have done this 3 years
Wow.
ago. And so timing can be different for different people, but I know that's kind of an expansive answer on your question,
Perfect.
but for me, hey, I've been there. I've wanted to do things. But once you have a family and you have kids, right? You have to I got to feed the family. I got to feed the family, but I also want to do these, investments and build something as well. And there's some risk involved. And so how do you balance that? And, it's once people figure it out or they get the light bulb goes on, they're ready to go. And it
Mm.
can be different for each person.
Yo, thanks for listening this far. It's at this point in the episode that I want to talk about Streetwise franchising, teaching, training, building, Streetwise franchising. As a franchise consultant, it's my job, it's my absolute pleasure to be able to help aspiring entrepreneurs find, launch, and build their ideal business. If you've always wanted to start your own business, but you don't know where to start, if you want to leave that corporate job, but you're a little afraid to take the risk, I'm here to help. I've been a franchise owner for almost a decade. I've learned what it means to build a team, to run a business, to struggle. And I know, based on my experience, how to help others find the right ideal business for them. Streetwise franchising. Stay humble, stay hungry, stay streetwise. Let's get back to the episode. My dad, I think he saw the writing on the wall. He was in his 50s. You kind of described the avatar that fit him. He was in that mid-level management position, saw new people coming in, saw movement around him, and wanted to take it by the horns. He didn't want his destiny to be in anybody else's hands. In his situation, he bought the franchise, retired, brought me in to do all the operations. So I was his operating partner in a sense, which we both know, when you build that business, it takes a little bit for it to get profitable. There might have been, a sweet spot there where if that was maybe a little bit earlier in time for the retirement, the business could have maybe generated some profitability and some revenue in time. In my experience, just explaining that, I'm kind of the anomaly, right? I came straight from working as a coach and administrator in the inner city to boom, now I'm a franchise owner. And he did me such an amazing service of making me a 50-50 partner. And I had no idea what that even meant or the trajectory that would put me on until years later. And now I see it and now I own it. And that's a big part of what I want to do. But my question to you is, do you feel like there is a sweet spot for somebody who's in that mid-level management, or they're an executive, or they're thinking about doing something on their own? Because for me, in my experience, having a business that needs to support 2 families' income makes it really hard on the business and really hard on the families who need the business to support it. It just adds a lot of stress. So is there a place there that if you can time it right and be proactive, you can avoid some of that?
Well, I think if there might be multiple ways to answer that question, but
Sure.
for me, a lot of our candidates they're seeing it. They see the problem, coming out there. They want to get ahead of it. And so they want to build something. Hey, I want to own this business on the side and build it up. If it, when it becomes successful and it can replace my salary, then I'll move over. And there's a challenge with that though. as you may have experienced, right? Well, you need that hands-on person, that operating
Yeah.
partner, if you will. You need someone that's going to run it day to day, and it's hard to get someone that to do that position that's going to care about the business as much as you do if you own it. It's a unique kind of thing. So you have to you have to you have to be able to see a little bit in the future and look at the scale. So that might mean, hey, this one service brand, it might be great if I had 4 or 5 territories, but then they only want to invest in one territory, right? And it's like, well, to hit your goals, you may have to go multi-unit. You may have to think a little bit bigger, understanding that ramp may be a little bit slower, but if you have other sources of income that can support you while you do it, that may give you, a better ramp. Also, how do you manage it? I think a lot of this, if you have the opportunity, not everybody does, but if you have the opportunity where both spouses are career people and you can live on one income. My wife and I have always designed our lifestyle that we live on one income, so that either one of us is in transition or something, then, that doesn't change our day-to-day life. We might not now do new investments or, things like that, but we kind of have one income to pay the bills and one income for wealth building, kind of build that wealth, invest in those things. And if you have that luxury, that can be a really good setup or sweet spot for starting to build that business. I mentioned, one of the mechanics I kind of referenced earlier. They were a husband-wife team, or they are, and she's a Fortune 500 executive, and her husband's full-time in a local business, and then they had 2 kids under the age of 10. They own 10 rental properties that they manage themselves, and then they wanted to start a franchise. And I was just kind of, when I first talked to them, I'm like, can you really do this? That seems like a lot. Are you understanding what you're getting into? And they're like, yes. And they did that, and then they crushed it. And in this case, the wife was leading the business, and she's just one of the most dynamic people I've ever seen, and just drove it. And within 18 months, they expanded into another state here. So they bought more of the metro territories. And, they recently called me and said, hey, we want to look at another business.
Wow.
So, serial entrepreneurs, right?
Sure.
And now, not everybody has that. And a lot of people are not looking for that. They're like, I don't have that makeup. I don't want to be that, serial entrepreneur. That just sounds stressful to me. They're looking for maybe a side business or more passive income. That's the holy grail, right? But I always say, look, owning a franchise is not passive. It's never going to be. We have some that are what we call semi-absentee. It's kind of an unfortunate term, but that's what the industry uses. But there's no truly passive business if you own it. So, but there are some that if you can mentally if you have some flexibility in your job, you can certainly take them on and build that while you're planning your exit from corporate America.
My college football coach, Mike Swider, shout out, would always say that sometimes it's the busiest people with the most on their plate that somehow always find a way to make room for more. And it's the people that are lazy or that don't have goals, and they're the ones that often find themselves, no, I just don't have the time. Oh, I just don't have the capacity. So no, that's interesting. In your experience, or your experience with the candidates that you work with, you kind of already answered this, but do you find that it works best when both spouses are engaged, or, one spouse is going to focus on the work while the other spouse can come in? I'm picturing in my mind, what if you have 2 spouses that both want to do something, but those 2 things aren't necessarily aligned? Do you run into that? do you run into launching two separate things at the same time and
Oh,
find there's issues there?
um, I, I haven't had it where like I had a husband and wife and then they bought, two franchises and started two different ones at the same time. I know candidates that have launched multiple concepts at the same time, but
Okay.
not like a husband running one, a wife running another, for instance.
Okay.
But it is a good question. I tell my candidates like I'm not your dad, and I'm not a marriage counselor. So let's just be upfront about
That's
that.
good to notate quickly in the beginning. Yeah.
I'm your coach. I'm a guide. I educate. I counsel. Those kinds of things. Um, that's what I can do for you. I can guide you through the process. Um, here's a story. So I had a candidate. He was a very sophisticated, well-off candidate in the Northeast, and he was with a great brand. I narrowed it down. He did the due diligence, and I coach all my candidates. Like, what about your spouse? Like, they're invited to attend the consultation. We'll include them in the discussions. I can have a separate call with them, educate them on what's going on. But I kind of preach that, right? And there are other colleagues in franchise who they will not do it without both spouses present. They will not do a consultation without both spouses.
Wow.
It's just a deal breaker. Not talking to you. Get your spouse on board, then we'll do this. I don't do that way, but I do certainly coach candidates like, look, you need to have a communication strategy. I want to understand where your spouse is, because they don't know everything you're going through. And all of a sudden, if you're not talking to them and then you're like, hey, I'm writing a check for $300,000 tomorrow to, start a mosquito franchise. And they're like, what?
Wait, what? You're doing a what with a what?
But I have my candidate in the Northeast I mentioned, and he got to he was ready. He was signing the next day. He had already paid the money to roll over his retirement account, which is not inexpensive. It's like $5,000, and to capitalize it and set up a Rob structure, everything. And then it was a Sunday night, and he's having dinner with his wife, and she said, I went to the club and had lunch with one of my friends, and they invested in a franchise 15 years ago and it didn't work out, so we're not doing that. Watch the whole thing. And he'd already paid the money and would ready to sign.
Man.
So it is important that you include your spouse in those discussions, and that we can't emphasize enough. Like I said, I'm not a marriage counselor and I'm not your dad, but we've done this. I mean, I've had, I think I looked at my numbers. So like I'm at about 800 people that I've have worked with at various stages in this process. Now, not all of them have gone all the way through the process, but I've talked to enough people and worked through enough situations to know that this is you're not going to move forward if you don't include your spouse.
And just another value for having a consultant or a coach to kind of guide you through to maybe, even though you don't fill the role of the marriage counselor. Shout out to all the marriage counselors out there. My wife and I have been doing that for just over a year, and man, I highly recommend it. It has been such a great experience for just building flows of communication. But there's just so many unknowns, and people trying to get into the space for themselves, and they don't necessarily hear those struggles, and that's not going to be me. Everything will be fine. This is my time. I earn this money, and it seems like you're able to help them to pivot, the people that listen to you. So that's really good.
We try. And, the majority of people that work with us do not sign a franchise agreement. They don't move forward. That's the nature of what we do, because until you get in and you actually get your hands dirty and look at franchises and talk with them and do some modeling, and, that's the messy process of discovery that it takes to even know, is this for me or not? So a lot of people don't even get that, they get through it and decide for whatever reason. Maybe they're like, you know what, I think I'm going to try to find another corporate job, or this isn't going to fit what I'm looking for, or whatever. Or the timing's not right. Then they may come back in the future. But the majority of candidates we work with don't end up signing a franchise agreement. So it's a little bit of an iterative process, and you have to kind of get in there and look at it before you know. But what we can do is we can help make that. The process feels weird because of the regulatory framework of franchising. That I think it's a pro and a con, but it's a con because it feels kind of weird when you're going through it, because you feel like the franchise companies are they're holding information from you, or they're being deceptive, and they're not. They're regulated in how they give you the information. They're not regulated in what they give you as far as what information they give you, but they're regulated in how they give it to you, meaning that they can tell you whatever they want about financial performance, but whatever they tell you, they have to tell every other franchisee candidate. And so then it becomes, if they only have averages in their item 19, and you which is the financial performance reps, and you say, hey, how's that location in Kansas City, near me doing? And they'll like, can't tell you. And we're like, what? So it sounds a little funny when you're going through it, but that's where the process you go through, the upside of it is that you're going through almost the same process, whether it's McDonald's or Great Clips or Orange Theory or Mosquito Joe. You're going to go through a similar process, and it allows you to compare and contrast because you're getting the information in a similar way, even though they're in different industries. They have different metrics and KPIs. It allows you to kind of compare and contrast a little bit and determine the right, to gravitate toward the right business models. And that's where what we do, because we know this process inside and out, and there's some tricks to it. There's registration states. There's all kinds of unique nuances that you have to deal with, but we know all that, so we can help you with navigate that. So you're going to have a good experience and get all the information you need to make a decision, yes or no. And no's a good one, because you're going to have to eliminate options to get to the right one.
Where does the consultant or the coach fall in with the candidate as they're doing their initial validation of talking to other franchisees in the system that they're looking at? Because I know that the consultant is going to introduce a candidate to a particular brand, and then the franchise development rep is going to take it away. But the development rep is a sales rep. The consultant is more of a guide. And so the consultant gets paid off of the deal getting done by the franchisor, but at the same time, the role is to make sure that the candidate understands all of the things that could go wrong, or all of the realities of the situation that the rep might not be as inclined to. Not that they're going to be shady on purpose, but there's a lot of people out there that are trying to make a buck. So with the consultant, I guess I'm asking it in two parts. How do you facilitate quality validation with other franchisees? That would be part one. And then part two, where is that balance for the consultant? Because you get paid when a deal gets done, but your job is to make sure the candidate falls into the right system.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, that's one of the reasons that I really like our network, because I feel like it's high integrity. Everybody does things the right way, and everybody is in it full time. This has to be your primary job. You can't just be, it's like, well, I'm just going to throw stuff at the wall, and if I do a transaction a year, then it's just kind of found. It's like, think of like a real estate agents, right? There's people who are professionals, very good at what they do. They're full time, and they're building a practice and building a business. they're not, if you have that mentality, which all of our consultants do, you're not going to last very long if you're just, if you've got commission breath and you're just trying to
There
throw
it
stuff at
is.
the wall to see
Yeah.
what happens. In the long run, like I said, I worked with a candidate 3 years ago, and because I'm thinking long term, there was no pressure. I'm like, hey, here's the education, here's what we do, here's how the process works. Love to help you, but maybe if the time's not right, let's talk later. They came back to me 3 years later because I think I had built that trust and credibility the right way.
That's amazing.
And that happens all the time, by the way.
Yeah.
The longer you do this, the easier it gets. The more people you've touched, the more people you talk to. And a lot of big source of referrals are previous candidates. If they didn't have a good experience, they're not going to refer you again, right? So if you're thinking about it correctly, and maybe that's starting the second, answering your second question.
Yeah.
But just like other things, it's, if you look at a profession like real estate agents or commercial real estate or brokers or anything, someone that's helping match buyers and sellers, there are good ones and there are bad ones, right? And you're gonna gravitate one that gives you the information you're asking for, that's transparent, and being an honest broker. And so I think that's why one of the reasons I really like franchise is I feel if it weren't me, I would recommend my candidate to any of the other consultants in our network and know they're in good hands. I cannot say that about everybody, but I can say it about our network, and I think that's a testament to how difficult it can be to get into our network. But that being said, going back to your first question, how do we work through validation? Yes, we once we go through the initial process, the consultation, we have brand introductions, and your candidate has decided on, hey, here's the 3 or 4 concepts I want to talk to. We register you with those brands. Then it becomes about how does that process start once you're handed over to the brand. And what I do, and I would say a lot of our consultants do, is I keep a weekly cadence strategy call. I call it a strategy call, and it's on the calendar. It keeps a discipline because I'm here to help you in your process. And a lot of times the candidate, they're going through it and their process is kind of starting to go sideways, and they don't even know it or recognize it because they haven't been through it before.
How could they?
Yeah, right. And so I'll see it and I'll be like, wait a second, what do you mean? They didn't send you the FDD, or, what's going on? So we can help make sure your process is on track. And here's my advice on validation as we go through that is that I'm going to coach you to say, first of all, respect the franchisor's process.
Okay.
And it has to be a mutual fit. They have to award you a franchise. I've had multiple candidates go all the way to discovery day and get rejected. And it's no fun for me. It's no fun for the candidate, and it's no fun for the development rep. And you mentioned development rep, ultimately those development reps, they may be, quote, salespeople in commission, but they have every incentive that they have to find the right fit, because that franchisor, when it gets to discovery day, the CEO and management team, they're going to reject a franchisee that does not fit their system. And I've had it happen to multiple candidates. Even ones I could maybe see it. I'm coaching them, and I'm like, you need to look at this like a job interview and put your best foot forward. And there's a disconnect, and they get rejected. And so what I always recommend to candidates is number one, follow the franchisor's process. So, and they're going to have a process for validation. Now, if it's an emerging brand, they don't have that many franchisees out there. And we work with a lot of emerging brands, right? It's not their first rodeo. They're a successful franchisor, great track record and history, but now they have a new brand concept coming out. They're not going to have a ton of validation. So their validation process oftentimes is going to be group validation calls, and they may have them once a week. and they may rotate which franchisees handle those calls. The reason is because if they're trying to grow quickly, they've got a ton of candidates coming through the pipeline, and they've got 10 franchisees. Those 10 people are getting calls, 28 calls a day. They can't run their business. So it is respectful to follow the franchisor's process in validation, especially on emerging brands. Now, that being said, I coach my candidates as well as no franchisor, if the franchisor development rep tells you you can't call anyone else in item 20, then that's a red flag. And you have every right. That's the whole point of FDD. Item 20 is a list of franchisees, their contact information, so you can reach out to them and do your due diligence. And you have every right to call anyone on that list, and you do. Now, what I recommend is don't do that until you've been disclosed the FDD, you followed their validation process. If that's not sufficient, for what you're needing, you're like, I'm not getting the answers that I need. I want to call more franchisees. Absolutely. Pull out item 20, go down the list and call anybody you want. Of course, there's no obligation for them to talk to you. Like
Sure.
any other group of people, some will be more receptive. Some are going to be, some may never call you back, but all of them went through this process, and generally they're generally happy to, take validation calls. And, my whole 6 years that I owned a franchise, I get the call occasionally. People would call me, they'd find me on LinkedIn. They're like, hey, I see you own this franchise, and, are you willing to talk to me? And I'd always take their calls, and I'd give them my honest opinion about the franchisor. And here's, nobody's perfect. And I was coach candidates, like, no franchise brand is going to be perfect. You're not looking for perfect. You're looking for a match for what your needs are and helping you reach your goals. And so, so that's how kind of I coach people through validation.
Man, I hit you with a 2-part. You did great navigating through that. Thank you. That was a great answer. I personally love validation calls. I have a lot of fun talking to candidates and giving away some of the things that have helped me be successful. I love talking about areas that I've fallen short and fallen on my face. And hey, I think it makes for funny stories now that I've survived. You got to survive it to be able to laugh about it. But those are some of my favorite things. I just love adding value to people. And man, good stuff. Well, before we wrap up, I gotta talk to you about this, man. This is something that pressing issue for me. You wrote a book.
I did.
You wrote a book. It's sitting right there behind you. Tell me about your process. Tell me about how you did it. I mean, writing a book is something that I've always wanted to do. And just like starting this podcast, it was something that I always wanted to do. I talk a lot about, it took me 5 years to make my first podcast episode. And then It took me 2 months and I had 20. And now 1 month later, I've got another 15 sitting on the shelf, and this one's going right back up on the shelf until I can get this business launched, and then I'll go back through and edit, and then eventually I'll hire somebody and they'll do all the editing for me. But man, I just got so much respect for authors and people who can take the time to just take the knowledge and the experience and put it to page and put it out there. So maybe walk me through your process, and when did you know you wanted to write something? How did you start? How long did it take? Hit me.
All right. Well, I'm a CPA, right, by training and background. I grew up in a worldwide accounting firm, and they really believed in education and training, and I just kind of baked into my thesis. And when we did this, I always wanted to say, look, candidates are going through a weird process, as we talked about, and I want to educate them on, how to be the best candidate, what to expect. The more prepared they are, right, the more successful they're going to be. And so when I started doing this, I wanted to get them engaged. I wanted to, send them something knowing that, hey, I'm vested in your success and your process as well. So I started sending them a book, and I sent them one of my colleagues' book. I read his book. I'm like, that's a pretty good book.
It's a good book.
Yeah, it was a good book, and I liked it. I still recommend it. but it was a little long and had like kind of history of franchising. And I'm like, and I was sending $18 every time. Like I'm going to Amazon and mailing it to my candidates. I'm like $18, $18, $18.
Yeah.
Not that that mattered, of course, but it
Sure.
was also, I'm sending them another consultant's book. I'm like, you know what? If I'm going to send them a book, I should really take the opportunity to send them my book. And so I set about, this was 2018, and I set about like allocating my time, and I trained myself on self-publishing. I'm like, this would be a nice, fun side project. So I got an Amazon Unlimited subscription, which is $9.99 a month. And I started reading
All
books
right.
about how to publish, how to self-publish on Amazon, how to write a book and what you should do and all that stuff. So I just kind of, started reading all these short nonfiction, books about this stuff. And of course, there's a gazillion of them out there. So some of them weren't that good. Some of them were better, but that's why I got the unlimited subscription. I'm like, well, if it's a bad book, I can just nix it and read the next one. So I trained myself on how to do it. And so it took me about 12 months, and I was not working very fast. You could do it a lot faster. But my goals were, wanted to write the book. I wanted to self-publish, and I wanted a companion guide. I was writing as a companion guide for my candidates, and just to educate them, right? And hey, it's franchising for you. Here's what to expect. So the it's kind of a foundation for them looking at buying a franchise business. There wasn't a lot of fluff and a lot of history or that kind of stuff into it. It was really more focused on, why are you getting into this? Is it for you? Here's what to expect. And so I started writing the book, and I would block time like every Sunday. I'm like, all right, I'm going to write for 3 hours, and just started writing the book. And I did an outline. And nonfiction is, let's be fair, nonfiction is easier, I think, than writing a novel, for sure.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. No doubt.
I'm
The grass was
outlining.
green. The sun was warm on his chest.
So
None of that.
and I was kind of writing a chronological process, so there was a natural flow of
Okay.
chapter
Cool.
1, chapter 2, chapter 3. How to lay it out. So as I laid it out, I just outlined it, and then subsection. Here's a chapter that's its own topic. Here are the subtopics. So I outlined it, started writing, and then and I used Grammarly, and I proofread that thing 1,000 times, and it still ended up getting published with some errors that I had to go back and change. But I wrote it in about 6 months, and then I hired, I had to hire some people. There's a few things you have to do to get published. I mean, publishing on Amazon is ridiculously easy. You have to set up an author account, and if you publish through Amazon Kindle Direct Publishing, you set up a KDP account, and it's pretty straightforward, actually. But you need a few things. So one is writing I wrote the manuscript, and when I tested it, it wasn't enough pages. And I was like, I realized, well, I've got some gaps, some topics I missed, and I wanted it to be thick enough that you could set it on a shelf and see that it had a.
Yeah.
I didn't want it to be a pamphlet. I wanted to word out fine, So
Okay.
so it needed to be about 150 pages to accomplish
Okay.
that. And I, you pick out the size you want, and so I just tried to pick what is the common size, the high volume, all those things. And so then I had to hire a developmental editor and a copy editor. And you can sometimes use the same person. I used the same person, did both of those functions, but you need developmental editing, you need copy editing. Developmental editing is conceptually, is this cohesive? You're missing a whole section here or a topic, like, your whole thing is disjointed, kind of putting the big picture together. And then copy editing, of course, is just actually fixing your language and your structure and that kind of stuff in the actual words themselves. And then you have proofreading. And then proofreading is just literally looking for typos and that kind of stuff. So I hired a developmental and copy editor. I hired a separate, and then I hired some separate proofreaders that helped me proofread it. And in addition, like I said, I used Grammarly and read it myself like 100 times, and still miss stuff. I'm like, how does that happen? I know every author has that. So went through that, and then you need kind of two creatives to help you. One is the cover, so you need someone to create the cover. And I just did a contest on 99 Designs, and for a fixed cost, and then people submit the covers. Like,
nice.
They submit their, and so I had like 150 submissions for people trying to win the contest for which cover I picked. So
that's really cool.
It's really a great process, because sometimes you're like, you can hire somebody and you're like, I know exactly what I want it to look like, and then they create it. But I didn't know. I'm like, I just gave them a dossier. Like, here's what the colors kind of I want, and here's kind of what I'm trying to vision or what I think I want. And then they just submit designs. And so I had like 150 people submit designs, and I think it was like $399 to the winner, and I picked one, and and then they made a couple of tweaks. I needed a barcode and my picture and things, but they did a good job. Some guy in Singapore won it.
Wow. Oh, that's really cool. Wow.
And then the last piece you need is the interior design. And of all the pieces, I think that one is the most important. And it was the most expensive, but also I think like it really makes or breaks the book, especially for a nonfiction. So I really liked the interior designer that I chose, and I just hired him because I saw all of his previous work. I'm like, I love the interior of his books. So I hired him, and he was in France, but I hired him also through 99 Designs, and he was a freelancer in France, and he did a great job, and he made some edits and changes for me. And, like I said, I end up actually publishing, and then found a couple of changes, had to redo it. He corrected it and republished. It wasn't his mistake; it was mine, or the proofreaders. But that happens. But the way Amazon is structured, that I was able to upload the new interior, and it did. It's not a new edition or any change. So that's what I did. Yeah, it took me about 6 months to get it published. About 6 months to write it.
Wow. Okay, so a full year after you started. 6
but
months
I was
to write,
not
and
very fast. Like,
sure.
Yeah, you could go a lot faster if you wanted to.
Yeah. Maybe if I was isolated in my focus, we got some things rocking.
You have to block time. You have to block time and say, okay, I'm going to work on, when am I going to work on the book? Because you have to kind of block some time to think about it. But I'm happy. I'll send you a copy. I'll send you a little,
Oh man, you already know. If you don't send me one, I'm getting one. Maybe I'll get one on Amazon. I'll support the hustle. I'll get one off the.
That's the hardest thing, because everybody's like, oh, I'll review your book, and then they never do.
So if you send one to me, I'm going to get it.
Yeah, well, I know
there it is.
No, I don't care if you buy it. I'll send it to you. Of course, it's nice to have a verified purchase if it's a review. That's more legit, right?
Sure.
But any reviews are hard to get. But a lot of people, like, I send them the book, they're like, oh yeah, I'll review it, and then they don't. And I understand.
Oh man. Yeah.
It's hard.
Yeah, that's how it is with.
It's hard to get reviewed if you buy a book or you write a book.
Tell me about it, man. I'm out here doing 100 treatments a day on the Mosquito Joe side, trying to get some reviews on Google, and the struggle's real. The struggle's real. Okay, last question for you. How would you coach up? This is a completely hypothetical person, but you're coaching up a young, savvy, brand spanking new franchise consultant just getting started. How do you coach up this young, savvy, fresh individual in setting his or her best foot forward?
Yeah, that's a good question. I will tell you that play the long game and, build your, you know, good or bad. I think, building your personal brand, like clearly you're a guy he cares about it. I see you're building your own personal brand. But you have to really kind of take that, you have to build it in a way that it's incremental and you're doing it every day. And over time, and by the way, that's not going to produce candidates for you maybe even the first year.
Sure. Yeah.
But however, it's going to provide shadow credibility for those candidates, meaning that if somebody finds you, however they find you, if you find a potential candidate, and maybe that's a referral, maybe it's, a friend of your dad's or who knows what. So however they find you, what we do, they are going to go check you out. They're going to look at your content. They're going to look at your profile on LinkedIn. They're going to look at your website, and they're going to make a judgment. However, whatever you think about it, it could be, it's like anybody else. They're going to make a judgment about you. And so the more robust you can build that, the better. Now, again, that's not going to produce, quote, leads for you, especially at the beginning. Now, I've been doing it 6 years. It's providing leads for me, all that digital platform and inbound lead generation and the book. And, I have a candidate this week and he's in St. Louis. He's like, man, I read your book and it was great. And I had to reach out to you. And then I didn't realize it till after I read the book that you're in St. Louis. And then we met up in person and, he's a new candidate. But it took a while. That did not happen overnight. So you have to be patient. If you keep your eye on the long-term prize and you have to do it consistently. I'll preach it. Consistency is more important than quantity. If you're consistently working on these things every day, I think over time that really breeds it. Now, that being said, when I started my first 12 months, I exceeded my own expectations. I'm like, wow, I did not expect to do as well as I did. However, that a lot of that came from just me really going full in. I know you have multiple businesses you're working on, you're trying to run those. And, I had a franchise, but I didn't manage it. I wasn't the GM and I was very scheduled. Okay, we're going to have a, management meeting once a week. I read my email at a certain time of day. And then, unless there wasn't a fire burning, I was trying to let my manager, run that business so I could focus on building my franchise business. And it takes that kind of focus. You got to really lean into it and just adopt the identity. And it's amazing. People will find you, but utilize your whole network. And it's not. What I always say is I like about our business is that I'm not a natural salesperson, and I never would have been. I was terrible at cold calling, and I didn't like it. I'll rephrase that. I was actually pretty good at it, but man, it was not my comfort zone. I did that for a couple of years.
Yeah, well, I relate to that.
I had that background, and what I like about our business is there's no one to cold call. You don't have a list of target people that you're like, okay, I'm going to call down the list and see who wants one. You can purchase paid leads, but even those are people who said, I'm interested in franchising. So there's no one to cold call. But if you're marketing and you're telling people, hey, I exist, you'll be surprised. Like the number one marketing challenge you have is letting people know you exist. Meaning you're a franchise consultant. Because a lot of people don't know franchise consultants exist. And although, LinkedIn has now, robots and, spam players have kind of, I think, giving us a bad rep on LinkedIn. So that's unfortunate. But when I started doing this, like, no one in my network knew any other franchise consultants. I was the only guy. So if anyone they know says, I'm thinking about a franchise, or like, maybe I want to start my own business, they're like, oh, you should call Dave Busker, because I was the only guy in their whole network they knew who was a franchise consultant. So just letting people know, hey, I'm doing this, I'm available, and just, being top of mind, kind of like a real estate agent in a way. Now, real estate is a much bigger red ocean. We're in a niche vertical, right? But the marketing concepts kind of apply, meaning that a real estate agent doesn't know when someone's going to buy or sell a house, but they want to be the person that gets the call, right? When it's time. When somebody says, you know what, I need to sell my house, or I'm ready to buy a house, you want to be the person they call. So in the franchise, I say use that analogy, is that, the equivalent of what used to be a magnet that the real estate agents send out, and you put the magnet calendar on your fridge because it's a calendar, but it's got, Bob Johnson, realtor or whatever.
Sure. Yeah.
That's like, no one does that anymore, but like the equivalent of that in the digital era is that to be that person that's top of mind. And the way I do that is that I try to add radical free value. I heard a online influencer use that term. He's like, I give away everything for free, all my knowledge, everything. I put it out there and I give it away for free. And people see that, A, you're a subject matter expert, you're credible, and they're not going to do it themselves, most times. And so you're going to be the person that gets the call, because they're going to see that you really know what you're talking about. And that's been my approach. But you still have to do outreach, and especially your first year or two, and leverage your network.
Oh, wow. No, it's so good, man. I appreciate you so much for taking the time. Mr. Dave Busker, the book, Franchise Vision. And they can get it on Amazon. Yep. I'm sure you got the website. I'm gonna attach all your links in the show notes when this thing gets posted. But I appreciate you so much, man. It's really good. It's good to be able to meet you on here, and I'm excited to be able to work alongside you as a franchise consultant.
Yeah, I look forward to it. Welcome. And
forward,
like I said, I wrote a book, but you have a podcast, that's on my bucket list. So I'll be back at you. I'll be getting some information from you here shortly, probably.
Hey man, that's one of my core values, in just personally, but with my organization. Core value number 3: value adder, problem solver. So anywhere where I can add value or help you solve problems, man, I'm available for it. But on that note, thank you for listening. To you out there, I hope this helped. Stay humble, stay hungry, stay streetwise. Peace. All right, everybody, that's a wrap. Thank you for making it to the end. Hey, if you like this episode, if it added value in any way to your life, do me a favor, give it a like, share it with a friend, give me a review, leave a comment, whether that's a rocket emoji, thumbs up, a fire, 100 emoji, leave me something. It's the only way to get this out there to other people, and I appreciate you so much for listening. As always, stay humble, stay hungry, stay streetwise. Peace.